us deeper as a nation into debt. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, since this is the two-year anniversary of the passage of the health reform law, the Affordable Care Act, and since the Supreme Court, of course, is meeting across the street, hearing various arguments attacking the legislation. They heard arguments this morning. They're going to hear arguments again tomorrow morning. They're going to hear arguments again Wednesday morning. I believe it's a crucial time to remind all Americans why this law was needed, why it still is needed, and how it will benefit families across this country. In my view, there is considerable confusion about what the health care reform legislation will accomplish, and I'm not surprised. The opponents of the legislation have worked hard in the last couple of years trying to confuse many Americans into thinking that the bill contains all kinds of nefarious provisions. Kaiser Family Foundation did a poll, however, that demonstrated that when Americans are asked about the actual provisions that are contained in the law, there is strong bipartisan support for those reforms. So I'd like to just take a little time to straighten out what the provisions of the law are and how I see them impacting on our health care system. Health care reform was needed when it was enacted 2 years ago for two important reasons. First, before reform, and even today, 1 in 6 Americans remain uninsured. That number was growing, is still growing. In my home state of New Mexico, the situation was even worse. We had more than 1 in 5 people in my state uninsured. That's the second highest rate in the nation, of any state in the nation. The large majority of the uninsured are working people. They have low incomes. They cannot afford to pay the very high cost of health insurance. The second important reason that we enacted health care reform was that the cost of health care was continuing to grow at an unreasonable rate. As you can see on this chart, this is based on data from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This is the Office of Actuary in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They estimate that national health expenditures per capita increased from 5% of gross domestic product in 1960 to 18% in 2010. So absent any intervention, this figure was projected to exceed 40% by 2080. The Affordable Care Act significantly improves the situation. It doesn't solve all the problems in our health care system, but it substantially improves the situation. Due to the Affordable Care Act, over the next 10 years, the rate of uninsured will be reduced by more than half. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office estimate. Low-income families will be able to afford health insurance, so they will not have to worry about going broke just because they get sick. The rest of America will not see their insurance premiums rise to absorb the cost of expensive hospital care when the uninsured have nowhere else to turn. With full implementation of this law, Americans will get higher quality health care while at the same time we begin to rein in the costs, the growing costs of health care. The law does so while protecting key parts of the health care system, such as Medicare. It extends the solvency of Medicare from 2017, prior to the enactment of this legislation, to 2024. And despite claims to the contrary, these reforms are fiscally responsible. They decreased federal health care spending by well over $1 trillion over the next 2 decades. Stated simply, the law protects the aspects of our health care system that are working well and fixes many of those aspects that are broken, and it does so in a fiscally responsible way. It achieves this through provisions that are intended to support three main goals, and let me go through those briefly. The first of those goals is to expand coverage and ensure that health insurance is affordable. The second of those goals is to improve the quality of health care. And the third is to begin reining in the rapidly rising costs of health care and create efficiencies in our health care system. We start with this coverage expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Under the law, people who need health care can get health insurance coverage. There is financial assistance to those who cannot afford it, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, most recent projections, 93% of Americans will have affordable health insurance coverage by 2016 with full implementation of this act. That is 30 million more Americans that will be covered who are currently uninsured. Some of these provisions have already taken effect and had a significant impact. For example, young adults up to the age of 26 can now receive health insurance coverage under their parents' insurance, regardless of their marital or school or employment situation. And since the implementation of this provision, 2.5 million uninsured young people across the country have gained that health insurance coverage. This includes over 21,000 young people in my home state of New Mexico. In addition, 20,000 seniors in my state who are in the so-called coverage gap for prescription drugs under Medicare are now saving on their prescription drugs because that so-called donut hole is decreasing in size as a result of this legislation. This will benefit 3.6 million seniors nationwide, is benefiting already 3.6 million seniors nationwide. Children with pre-existing conditions are no longer able to be discriminated against, and adults with pre-existing conditions who cannot get insurance have the option for coverage in a high-risk pool. With full implementation of the law, those adults will be in the same circumstance as children with pre-existing conditions in that they will not be able to be discriminated against. What's more, the major coverage provisions are still to come. They begin in 2014. Medicaid will be expanded to cover more low-income Americans, those whose incomes go up to 133% of the federal poverty level. This is a critical provision since experts tell us that the expansion of Medicaid coverage is the most cost-effective way to provide insurance to low-income, uninsured individuals and families. 17% of the non-elderly population nationwide benefit from the Medicaid expansion and the tax credits in this legislation. In New Mexico, as well as the states of Texas and Louisiana and California that have high rates of uninsured, the estimate is that 36 to 40% of residents could benefit. Lower and middle-class income families will be eligible for health insurance tax credits to help purchase health insurance. While most Americans will still get health insurance through their employers, those that do not can purchase health insurance through the health insurance exchanges. These will be virtual insurance shopping malls in each state that will offer an easy-to-understand menu of options with which to compare insurance plans. So we will have informed and empowered consumers who can choose the plan that is right for them and their family. The intent of the health insurance exchange is to level the playing field, increase competition among insurers, and thereby keep rates competitive. Contrary to much of the rhetoric that we've heard, states will not shoulder the fiscal burden of this coverage expansion. Limiting costs to states was a priority when we drafted up this health reform legislation. In fact, the federal government commits to assume 100% of the cost of the Medicaid expansion for newly eligible individuals during the first 3 years, beginning in 2014. Federal contributions are going to phase down after that slightly over the following years so that by 2020, the federal government will be responsible for 90% of the cost of those newly covered individuals. For example, my state of New Mexico is expected to receive $4.5 billion in 2014, 2015, and 2016 as we expand coverage to more enrollees. This will allow access to Medicaid for about 180,000 newly eligible New Mexicans. Let me refer to this chart that's here beside me. This shows the Congressional Budget Office estimate of the expansion impact on state spending on Medicaid. And as we can see, contrary to a lot of the statements that are made here on the Senate floor and elsewhere, this increase is less than 3%. This is additional spending on expansion. It is a small fraction, 2.8% of state Medicaid spending. This is for the period 2014 through 2022. So while reform expands Medicaid, it also makes it possible for some current Medicaid enrollees to become eligible to participate in these health insurance exchanges and brings them into the private market. According to the Urban Institute analysis, the net effect of enactment of the Affordable Care Act on state budgets in the worst-case scenario will see states realizing net budgetary savings of at least $40 billion during the period 2014 to 2019, and it's possible that those gains could be as high as $131 billion. With respect to affordability, and I know my colleague who was just here on the floor was talking about affordability. The impact on New Mexico families is a good example. On average, families in my state will see a decrease in premiums, insurance premiums, perhaps as much as 60%. In addition, 2/3 of New Mexicans could potentially qualify for subsidies or Medicaid, and nearly a quarter could qualify for near full subsidies or Medicaid.
Your time has expired.
Mr. President, I see a colleague here who wishes to speak, and therefore I will ask that the balance of my statement be included in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Longer. Would you rather go a little longer now?
Mr. President, my colleague has said that I could proceed for a few more minutes. Let me just...
That at the conclusion of the Senator's New Mexico's remarks that I be recognized for up to 25 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator from New Mexico.
I thank my colleague from Oklahoma for his courtesy. Mr. President, let me talk a little about the second and the third goals that I outlined earlier. The second goal of the Affordable Care Act is improve the quality of care. There's not a lot of discussion about that, but that is a main thrust of this legislation. A strong, well-trained health care workforce is essential if we're going to have quality health care in this country. Many provisions of the bill will strengthen the health care workforce. One obvious question is, what's the need we're trying to address here? Let me just point out that 25% of the counties in the United States are designated as health professional shortage areas. In my state, 32 of the 33 counties are designated as health care professional shortage areas. We are absolutely last. New Mexico is absolutely last in all states with regard to both access to health care and the utilization of preventative medicine. The Affordable Care Act contains key provisions to improve access and delivery of health care services to these areas. We train a great many additional physicians, nurses, pediatric specialists, and other health care providers. There's a major push to improve the quality of care by focusing on outcomes and effectiveness of medical treatments. All of this is very positive, and should have been done many years ago in this country. I'm glad that we are finally doing it as part of this health care reform legislation. The third and final goal of the legislation, as I mentioned earlier, is to begin to rein in costs and eliminate waste and inefficiency. Experts agree there's a tremendous amount of waste and inefficiency in our health care system. Anyone who's gone to a hospital can see that. Estimates indicate that as much as a third of medical care does not, in fact, improve anyone's health. I think this bears repeating. A full third of all dollars spent on health care in this country does not contribute to the overall health of the population. We're trying to deal with that in a variety of ways in this legislation to get more cost-effective treatment and to get more efficiency in our health care system. The law provides for savings by stopping investments in so-called Cadillac insurance plans. Second, there's new transparency and accountability for insurers to justify premium increases. Third, the law requires that insurers spend at least 80% of the premiums that they collect on actually providing medical care rather than on CEO salaries and shareholder profits and administrative costs. Fourth, the Affordable Care Act increases competition and price transparency through these health insurance exchanges that we establish. And fifth, the law establishes an independent body to recommend policies to Congress to help Medicare lower costs while providing better care. Mr. President, I could go into quite a discussion of the advisory board that we established to try to control growth in the cost of Medicare. I think it's a very meritorious provision and one about which a great deal of bad information has been provided. But in conclusion, the facts demonstrate clearly to me that these reforms will move us forward toward more affordable health care with greater choice for American families. We will see less waste. We will see less inefficiency in our health care system. We will see higher quality of care, and we will start to bring rising health care costs under control. These are worthy goals. They are the goals of this health care reform legislation. I look forward to seeing them achieved in the coming months and years. Mr. President, again, I thank my colleague for his courtesy in allowing me to continue longer than was planned, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, we're going to have a vote this afternoon. It's going to be a procedural vote. Some will be voting different ways, but there is a substance behind the issue at large. Last week, President Obama, visited Cushing, Oklahoma. It may have been the first time he's ever been to Oklahoma. I don't know. He claimed that under his watch, and I'm quoting now, he said, "America is producing more oil today than at any time in the last 8 years," unquote. It seems that in the midst of a $4 to $5 a gallon gasoline, he's trying to convince the American people that he's not the one to blame. Clearly, he is the one to blame. That's why I think it's important to set the record straight. After all, it was Obama's Energy Secretary, Stephen Chu, we can't forget this, who said, quote, "Somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe." That was his Energy Secretary. That was speaking in behalf of President Obama. So the motive is to raise the price of tax. And right now we're over halfway there. And we all remember the President's statement during 2008 campaign when he said, "Under my plan, the electric rates would necessarily skyrocket." His policy agenda has been in lockstep with this goal. Mr. President, President Obama has had a 4-year war on fossil fuels, and now we're paying for that at the pump. The oil and gas taxes, nowhere has the President been more resolute in stopping oil and gas development than in his tax proposals. Every budget since he was sworn in. So now we're talking about 4 budgets that this President has presided over. And keep in mind, when a budget is designed by a President, whether he's a Democrat or Republican, it's the President, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, not the House, not the Senate. It's the President that is responsible for that budget. In every budget, the President has called for the elimination of all tax provisions made available to the oil and gas industry. This year, these tax increases totaled about $40 billion over 10 years. So while the President was going around the country last week trying to convince everyone that he's actually pro-oil and gas, he laid the groundwork for Senator Menendez to push a bill through the Senate to raise taxes on the industry. Senator Menendez's bill, S-2204, proposes to either modify or outright cancel the following tax provisions for major integrated oil and gas firms. First, the Section 199 manufacturer's tax deduction. Secondly, intangible drilling costs, sometimes referred to as IDC. Third, percentage depletion. And four, the foreign tax credits for oil and gas firms. Last time we actually had a vote in the Senate on these provisions was in June of 2010. I remember it very well because that was when distinguished Senator from Vermont, Senator Sanders, offered an amendment that would have raised taxes on oil and gas producers by $35 billion over 10 years by repealing Section 199, same thing as he's trying to do, percentage depletion and IDCs. And while the Menendez bill is a little different, that it applies to the larger companies, those with substantial production levels, it's important to point out that the Sanders Amendment, and I led the opposition to the Sanders Amendment, and it was defeated almost 2-1. It was 35 to 61. The President insists that these tax accounting provisions are actually subsidies, but nothing could be further from the truth. So this hasn't been done yet, to my knowledge, to explain what it is. It's so important that people understand what these provisions are. 199, Section 199, is the manufacturer's tax deduction. Section 199 was added to the tax code as a part of President Bush's 2004 tax law. It was designed to support domestic manufacturing, and it did this by providing a 9% tax deduction for manufacturers, effectively lowering their tax rates from 35 to 32%. Now, the provision was phased in between 2005 and 2010, but in 2008, something strange happened. The oil and gas industry was singled out so that it could only claim a portion of that deduction. In other words, all other manufacturers of all other goods in America could claim that deduction except oil and gas. The Menendez proposal would repeal Section 199 for major integrated oil companies. In the President's budget, a similar proposal was scored at $11.6 billion, and I'm going to add all these up in a minute to let you know why we're paying so much at the pump. What's most interesting to me about Section 199 and its tax deduction is that it's available to any company in the United States that creates any kind of manufacturer's goods here at home. Firms that build and sell refinery equipment, airplanes, washing machines can all claim the deduction. It may be surprising, however, that the deduction is also available for movie producers, not oil and gas producers, but movie producers. That's right, the American film industry can claim a deduction for making movies. So President Obama and Senator Menendez are putting their Hollywood friends and movie stars ahead of an industry that makes us less reliant upon oil imports from the Middle East, and there's really no surprise there. Now, the next thing is, now that was Section 199. That's a manufacturer's deduction. Applies to all, and it benefits all manufacturers to encourage domestic manufacturing. Second thing is intangible drilling costs, IDCs. It's a little bit more complicated. The intangible drilling costs are expenses oil and gas firms incur when they drill and prepare new wells. These costs often total between 60% and 80% of a well's cost. They are generally not recoverable and include things like site preparation, labor, and design. Intangible drilling costs are firmly grounded in sound accounting principles. Every basic accounting course discusses the principles of cost recovery. It states that businesses should be allowed to write off their expenses from the revenue they earn to account for the cost of doing business. Now, that's logical. No one's going to disagree with that. When purchasing substantial capital equipment, depreciation is often used to recover the cost of an investment over its useful life. But things like wages are nearly always deducted immediately, because once a company has paid an employee for work, it has no lasting value. To retain the value, you have to keep paying the employee. Hence, it is an immediate expense, and it is deducted from the revenue when determining the net profit. The IDC deduction has been on the books since 1913. It's not anything new. We've lived with it for almost a century. And since most of the costs associated with the preparation of a new well should be classified as an immediate expense, things like labor, that type of thing, the expensing of IDCs makes sense. To claim that it is a subsidy is totally dishonest. Every company, regardless of whether it's an oil or a gas firm or any other company, is allowed to recover costs associated with their investments in business operations. If this is going to be labeled a subsidy for the entire economy, then we've got big problems. Current law allows most oil and gas firms to write off these expenses as an alternative to capitalizing their costs into the total value of the asset being developed and then depreciated. But at some point along the way, the law was changed so that major integrated oil firms are required to capitalize 30% of their IDCs and amortize them over a 60-month period. The Menendez bill would eliminate this option and require oil and gas firms to capitalize all of their IDCs. A similar proposal was in every one of the President's budget. It was scored at $13.9 billion. So we're going to be adding that up in a minute. Together, the repeal of Section 199 and the IDC should compromise 10% of America's oil and gas production capacity by 2017. This translates into a potential loss of 59,000 jobs, 600,000 barrels of oil a day in domestic production, and the loss of $15 billion in capital expenditures in 2012 and potentially $130 billion over the next 10 years. So that's it. Now, percentage depletion, very similar to this. Again, it's been with us. Since 1926, small producers and millions of royalty owners have had the option to utilize percentage depletion to both simplify their tax filing and to account for the decline in the value of the minerals produced from their properties. Current law allows small producers to take a 15% deduction from their gross income from a given producing property in lieu of a complicated depreciation deduction. This tax provision is particularly important for the production of America's nearly 700,000 low-volume marginal wells, making it essential to my state of Oklahoma. You know, even though the small marginal wells only produce about 2 barrels a day, they account for 28% of the total production. We are one of the, if not the largest marginal states out there. These are truly the little guys, and the President wants to go after them and destroy the incentives that keep these older wells producing by repealing percentage depletion. If he were able to do this, it would increase taxes on the industry by $11.5 billion. Now, what's most interesting about the Menendez proposal is that it only applies to major integrated oil companies, which aren't even allowed to claim percentage depletion. Proving the 2204 is nothing more than a political theater. The modification of the foreign tax credits for dual capacity taxpayers. The United States is one of the only developed, I think it is the only developed country in the world that has global corporate tax system. This means that the IRS and Uncle Sam reach all over the world to tax profits made by U.S. companies outside of our borders. When you combine this with our 35% corporate tax rate, which is one of the largest, I think it's the largest, the highest on earth, our corporate tax policies are the worst in the world. The global corporate tax system works like this. When a U.S. firm operating overseas, they pay taxes on those profits in the countries they're operating in. For example, a United States company makes a product in South Korea, sells it to the South Koreans, and they make $1 million profit. But because their corporate rate is 22%, as opposed to ours 35%, the firm pays $220,000 in taxes. Now, that makes sense. If a U.S. firm has made the same product and profit in the United States, it would be subjected to a 35% tax, which would be $350,000 in corporate taxes. Now, this also makes sense, except it's too high. However, because of our global corporate tax system, if a firm does the same thing in Korea, then they have to pay the differential between 22% and 35% when they bring the money back into the United States. But wait a minute. We want to bring the money back. We want to stimulate the economy here. So why would they have a disincentive to bring that money back to invest in America? In this example, a U.S. firm would have to pay an additional $130,000, so they would be doing a great thing for foreign countries, but certainly not for us. It doesn't make any sense at all. Senator Menendez's bill makes this awful policy even worse by limiting the ability of major integrated oil firms to account for the taxes they pay in other countries when they calculate what they owe the United States. The President made a similar proposal in his budget this year, and if enacted, it would raise taxes by about $10 billion over 10 years. And you pay for more of this on the pump. In a minute, we'll add all this up. Instead of making the corporate tax system even less competitive than it is today, we should aim to completely reform it so that we move to a territorial system that doesn't reach outside our borders to collect more taxes. Those are the major provisions of the Menendez-Obama bill. If they were enacted to the extent proposed by President Obama's budget, they would be a tax hike of $47.1 billion. Now, again, that relates to the cost of the gas at the pumps. The President claims that he's doing this in the name of forcing oil and gas industry to pay its fair share. He claims that it will not harm domestic oil production, but this claim rejects the well-known process companies follow when making investment decisions. Successful oil and gas companies, like those in all industries, are faced with seemingly endless opportunities. To sort through the opportunities, they've got to have a way to rationally decide which projects are in the best interest of their investors and which are not. Most companies do this by determining which investments will give them the highest rate of return, given the risk. Taxes play an incredibly important role in this. If taxes increase, then cash flow from the project decreases. Therefore, taxes in the United States increase. The competitiveness of domestic projects decrease significantly relative to the opportunities available abroad. When the rubber meets the road, this means the United States oil and gas firms, especially the big ones, targeted by the Menendez-Obama bill, will be more likely to select international projects than U.S.-based projects, and this is bad for our economy. The other ways Obama is killing oil and gas, the taxes aren't the only thing that the President is doing. They are significant, and I mentioned 4 of them that are very significant. But look at the Keystone Pipeline. You know, he just got back from the state of Oklahoma, I think his initial visit there. It's another example. While he was in Cushing, that's the central part of Oklahoma. So those that are not familiar with it, that's kind of the intersection of all the pipelines. He said that he was going to expedite the permitting of the southern leg of Keystone. Now, that would be the leg going from Cushing, Oklahoma, down through the Houston area. But what he didn't say is that this is part of the part that he doesn't have any control over. In other words, he has no control over the south half. The reason he does the north half, and that which we've been talking about, is because that crosses a country boundary, a line from Canada to the United States. So the President has a say. He doesn't have a say in this. So he couldn't stop it if he wanted to. Obviously, he would want to, because he's already demonstrated that. Moreover, his action to block the northern leg of the Keystone Pipeline is preventing the immediate creation of over 20,000 jobs and up to 465,000 jobs by 2035. I don't think anyone really argues with that analysis. The President's efforts to stop fracking, that's hydraulic fracturing, is another example. Much of today's renaissance in oil and gas production is a result of the advancements in this technology. But he has done everything he can to paint a nasty and suspicious picture of it, and he has 10 federal agencies, including the EPA, the Department of Energy, the Bureau of Land Management, looking at ways to regulate hydraulic fracturing at the federal level. In addition, he has also kept millions of federal lands off limits to oil and gas. So as far as the hydraulic fracturing is concerned, I know a little bit about that because in my state of Oklahoma, we had the first hydraulic fracturing that took place in Duncan, Oklahoma. That was in 1949. There's not been one documented case of groundwater contamination using hydraulic fracturing. So the only reason that he's opposed to it is it's part of his war on fossil fuels. If he can stop hydraulic fracturing, he's going to stop all these type formations, and everybody knows that. But then, so we've already done that. You've got the tax problems, you've got the pipeline, you've got the hydraulic fracturing. But in addition to that, his attempt has been to stop production on federal lands and make federal lands off limits to oil and gas exploration, and even withdrew some lease sales conducted during the Bush administration, citing the need for more environmental review. Today, this is significant, 83% of federal onshore lands are inaccessible or restricted to drilling. No drilling is allowed on the entire east and west coast. No drilling is allowed in ANWR, in Alaska. The very limited drilling is in the Gulf. Oil and gas production is skyrocketing in states like North Dakota and Texas, simply because the president has very little control over the drilling there. He doesn't have control. That's not federal land. This is in Texas and in Oklahoma and in North Dakota. The Congressional Research Service concurs, stating in a recent report that about 96% of the increase in oil and gas production since 2007 took place on non-federal lands. In other words, it's happened in spite of the president's effort. The president's passing all these punitive taxes, but since he doesn't have control over the private land, that's what's increased. He tries to say in my administration that we've expanded the production. Well, that's happened in spite of his policies. At the end of the day, all of President Obama's oil and gas policies are making it harder for the U.S. firms to justify projects here at home. This is to the detriment of our economy. Just look at it, the increase in taxes, the killing of the pipelines, the stopping of hydraulic fracturing, making off limits. On Friday, that lets you know what some of the other states are missing out on. On Friday's New York Times front page, an article ran about oil and gas development going on in West Texas. It describes how this helped the local economists, saying newfound wealth is spreading beyond the fields. In nearby towns, petroleum companies are buying so many pickup trucks that dealers are leasing parking lots the size of city blocks to stock their inventory. Housing in such a short supply that drillers are importing contractors from Houston. The hotels are leased out before they're even built. 2 new office buildings are going up in Midland, a city of just over 110,000 people, the first in 30 years, while the total value of downtown real estate has jumped 50% since 2008, with virtually no unemployment. Restaurants can't be found, servers, they can't find people to work because they're fully employed. You know, we have one of the individuals from Oklahoma, a great producer, who went up to North Dakota. In North Dakota, he is up there right now. I talked to him just yesterday, and he said the biggest problem we have is we can't hire anybody. It's full employment. So there they are up there, and things are really great, and that's what the rest of the country is missing out on. Now, when we make the U.S. less competitive for U.S. oil and gas firms, as the president's tax policy proposes, this sort of red-hot growth goes to places like Azerbaijan and Nigeria instead of to Midland, Texas, and Oklahoma City. Rather than help our economy, the president and his tax policies make us more reliant upon foreign oil imports from unstable regions in the world. Now, I don't know about you, but I would rather see pickup truck dealerships running out of vehicles to sell in Cushing, Oklahoma than in Caracas, Venezuela. The president won't admit this, but we've seen what punitive tax hikes do to the oil and gas industry. They hurt our economy. President Carter, by the way, way back in the early 80s, he had the windfall profit tax. He was going to punish those bad oil companies. As a result of that, it decreased domestic production by 3 to 6%, which increased American dependence on foreign oil. At that time, almost all of it was in the Middle East, from 8 to 16%. It doubled our dependency by putting taxes on the oil industry here. A side effect was also declining, not increasing tax collections. So we know what happens when you do this sort of thing. We don't need to try to experiment again. Regardless, the president and most on the left insist that U.S. taxpayers are subsidizing oil and gas firms, but apparently they haven't been reading the facts. The Tax Foundation recently estimated that between 1981 and 2008, oil and gas companies sent more money to Washington and state capitals than they earned in profits for shareholders. The administration's own Energy Information Agency reported that the industry paid about $35.7 billion in corporate taxes in 2009. The oil and gas industry sends $86 million per day to federal and state governments, and their effective income tax rate is over 41%, which may be the highest of any industry in America. But the President and congressional Democrats want them to pay more. In addition to these tax increases, Secretary Salazar recently told Congress that his department is planning to raise the onshore royalty rate by 50%. These are the royalty owners, to ensure taxpayers get a fair return on the development of oil and gas leases on public lands. If what we're trying to do is raise more revenue, we should get it by growing the economy. You know, we've used the figure over and over again. By each 1% increase in economic activity, that translates into about $50 billion in new revenue. And we can do that by unlocking more domestic supply for development. And this will lower prices at the same time. We have plenty of it. The CRS report recently stated that we have the largest combined oil, natural gas, and coal recoverable reserves on Earth, more than any other country, more than Saudi Arabia, more than any country. This means that we have 50 years' supply of oil to present consumption here in the United States for 50 years, just exploiting our own development, or 90 years supply of natural gas. At the end of the day, this bill and the rest of the President's proposals will only make U.S. oil firms less competitive compared to their international peers. It will raise the cost of energy by restricting global prices. It will force us to become more reliant upon others, which will make us more vulnerable from the defense and economic security perspective. The only way to solve this is and to do something about reducing price at the pumps, is to start developing our own resources. A minute ago, I talked about what's happening in Midland, Texas, what's happening in North Dakota, what's happening in some areas in Oklahoma. And I can remember when I was a little kid, I worked on cable tool rigs. That was a very difficult thing at that time. There's a man named A.W. Swift who had 18 cable tool rigs. At that time, instead of rotaries, they would pound down. And we would go several times. I'd work 2 shifts. One night I was working the second shift. The well blew up. He had one son named Bert. Bert was killed. I wasn't. And when I stop and think about how the prosperity in those days of the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma, in a nearby town of Pawhuska, you had to wait in line to pay your lunch bill. I mean, it is full employment, not an empty storefront. Well, up until we started producing again in Oklahoma, it was very much almost a ghost town. Now things are coming back, and we can take advantage of this. It is in spite of the tax policies of President Obama. We are coming back, and we can do this throughout the United States. The most important thing we can do is to make sure that the Menendez-Obama bill to increase taxes on the oil and gas companies in the United States is defeated, and we hope we have the opportunity to do that. With that, I yield the floor.
Morning business.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Consent in the motion to...
Without objection.
All right.
Thank you. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S-2204, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 337 S-2204, a bill to eliminate unnecessary tax subsidies and promote renewable energy and energy conservation.
Under the previous order, the time until 5:30 p.m. will be equally divided between the 2 leaders or their designees. Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask unanimous consent that quorum calls be equally divided in the time of each side.
Without objection.
And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I come to the floor
We're
today.
in a quorum call.
I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to express concerns about the rising cost of gasoline and the Obama administration's efforts to further increase the American consumers paying at the pump. As we all know, the average price of gasoline is now more than doubled since the first week of the President's inauguration in January 2009, from $1.84 a gallon to $3.86. Furthermore, the Associated Press has reported that the typical American household spends about $4,155 a year filling up at the pump, an all-time high, 8.4% of the median household income, and the highest percentage spent for gasoline since 1981, when oil prices soared due to the crisis in the Middle East. The Energy Information Administration estimates that 72% of the price of a gallon of gasoline is made up from the cost of crude oil, which is a globally traded commodity. And although some would like to distract from the fundamentals, Congress cannot repeal the law of supply and demand. Indeed, President Obama used to agree with us. Last March, for example, he said that producing more oil in America will help lower oil prices, close quote. However, his administration has adopted policies that directly conflict with our goal of lowering gasoline prices. And to add insult to injury, with the public outcry, the President is out to further confuse the facts and actually take credit for increasing production when those increases have been on private lands outside of his control, and while opposing greater exploration for oil and gas on federal lands under his purview. At the same time, he's even seeking now to push prices even higher by raising taxes in his FY13 budget. This week, the Senate will be debating a bill by Senator Menendez from New Jersey to increase taxes on oil producers. I don't know how anyone could reach the conclusion except that by raising taxes on the people who produce oil and gas, it will raise, not lower, the cost of oil and thus refined petroleum product known as gasoline. So actually, by punitively and in a discriminatory sort of way raising prices on an unpopular sector of the economy will actually make matters worse, not better. Now, the tax code supports the energy sector by providing a number of targeted tax incentives or tax incentives only available to the energy industry. In addition to targeted tax incentives, there are a number of broader tax provisions that are available for energy and non-energy related industries. For example, Section 199 domestic production deduction incentive is available to most domestic manufacturers with income derived from production property that was manufactured, produced, grown, or extracted within the United States. So this Section 199 provision applies to a whole host of American businesses and not just the oil and gas business. Yet the Menendez bill and the Obama administration continue to single out oil producers for tax increases, even though oil-related activities are already limited from claiming the deduction compared to other industries. Analysis by the Congressional Research Service for the energy targeted tax incentives show that while the majority of U.S. primary energy production comes from fossil fuels, the majority of energy tax-related revenue losses are associated with provisions designed to support renewables. 77.9% of U.S. primary energy production is attributed to fossil fuels, 77.9% in 2009. Of the federal tax support targeted to energy in 2009, an estimated 12.6% went toward fossil fuels. In contrast, in that same year, more than 10% of U.S. primary energy sources came from renewable fuels. In other words, just to repeat, 10.6% from renewable, 77.9% in that same year from oil and gas. But notwithstanding the fact that only 10% of energy produced came from renewable fuels, 77.4% of energy-targeted federal tax support went towards supporting renewable fuels. If we want to put all of these tax provisions on the table, I think we should do that. Matter of fact, Simpson-Bowles identified more than $1 trillion of tax expenditures, but let's not just pick out one sector of the economy and in the process raise taxes and increase the price of gasoline at the pump as an unintended but clearly likely outcome. We know that the Menendez bill is not about tax reform. This is about mixing the message, trying to drive a wedge between the American people and the people who actually create jobs. Unfortunately for the administration, raising taxes will, in fact, translate into higher prices. It's a fair question to ask whether the administration can defend its policies, such as their budget proposal to raise taxes, where they argued that these tax provisions should be repealed because they, quote, encourage overproduction of oil and are thereby, quote, detrimental to long-term energy security. I'm not sure most Americans understand that the official policy of this administration is that tax deductions should be removed because they encourage overproduction of oil here in America, when I thought the goal, one of our goals, was to produce more here at home so we would depend less on imported energy from abroad. And then there's the Keystone Pipeline, which is well known. The President is the primary obstacle to the completion of that pipeline, which will create more than 20,000 new jobs and produce 700,000 barrels of oil at refineries in the United States from a safe and friendly source, the nation of Canada. Because of the President's blocking this completion of the Keystone XL pipeline, they're looking for alternate customers. And indeed, the Prime Minister of Canada has visited China to prospect that potential purchase. What's worse, it's not just the President hasn't acted, it's the President's actually lobbied here in the Senate to defeat efforts to bypass his obstruction to the completion of the Keystone XL pipeline. Well, the President must be feeling the heat because he showed up in Cushing, Oklahoma, to celebrate and to say he would expedite about a third of the pipeline, which ironically doesn't require him to do anything. It certainly doesn't turn on the spigot in Canada to get the oil in that pipeline to come from Canada down to the United States. So we see that our nation has no coherent energy policy. We see that not only is this an area that's been neglected to the detriment of the American consumer, but actually the sorts of policies being pursued by the administration, particularly with regard to the Keystone XL pipeline and raising taxes on domestic oil producers, are designed to make matters worse for the American consumer, struggling at a time as they are to recover from this recession, historically high rates of unemployment, and too few jobs. Looking at all the evidence on energy prices, it's hard to come to any conclusion other than that high energy prices are part of President Obama's plan. The policies he's put in place have intentionally elevated the price of gasoline, much to the detriment of the American consumer. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in support of S-2204, which is my legislation to repeal big oil subsidies. Mr. President, this bill is pretty simple. We end wasteful subsidies to the big five oil companies, and we use those proceeds to invest in clean energy, in creating jobs, and reducing the deficit. I think the American people are sick and tired of paying ridiculously high gasoline prices and then at the pump, and then paying big oil again with our collective taxpayer subsidies, which they get. I think that money is better spent keeping our economy going and developing alternatives to oil that will create competition in the marketplace and help to reduce gas prices. Madam President, we're poised to waste $24 billion over the next 10 years, subsidizing only 5 companies who are poised to make over $1 trillion. Let me repeat it, $1 trillion in profits, not proceeds, in profits over the same time frame. And as we all pay more at the pump, big oil rakes in more money. Exxon boasts in its Securities and Exchange Commission filings that for every dollar increase in the price of oil, their profits rise by $375 million. For every dollar the price of oil goes up, they boast in their filings that their profits, not proceeds, profits rise by $375 million. The American driver's pain is big oil's profit. And what is big oil doing with its profits? Well, the answer is not a lot useful. As you can see in this chart, the profits from the big 5 oil companies were $137 billion in 2011. That's an impressive 75% increase from 2010. Did they use that extra money to produce more oil, as some of my colleagues here would suggest? No, they didn't. They took your money and actually, in that time frame, didn't produce a drop more of oil. As you can see, despite the fact that overall U.S. production is higher now than it has been in the last 8 years, last year these 5 companies actually produced 4% less oil. They produce 4% less oil. So it's fair to ask, if they did not invest to produce more oil, then what are they doing with this $137 billion in profits, a 75% increase in profits in 1 year? Well, they spent about $38 billion repurchasing their own stock to enrich themselves, and they spent nearly $70 million on campaign contributions and lobbying to protect their billions of dollars in subsidies. As you can see here, it was a pretty smart investment. For every dollar that they spent in lobbying, they got about $30 in subsidies. One might say that's not a bad return on their investment. So, Madam President, instead of giving these subsidies to big oil so they can enrich themselves and seek to affect and control our political system, I think we could use some of those funds to reduce the deficit. I think we can all agree that we need to reduce the deficit, but there seems to be some considerable disagreement on how to do it. Last week, those on the other side of the aisle came out with what I call the Romney-Ryan budget, their proposed budget, and it would drastically cut funding for wounded soldiers, for seniors, for students, but it leaves in place these wasteful subsidies. It leaves in place these wasteful subsidies even though we have this enormous profit. Now, through some political sleight of hand, they defy reality when they tell us with a straight face that we have to make tough choices, and then they cut funding for wounded soldiers, for seniors, and students, but won't touch the subsidies for big oil. Somehow in this Republican parallel universe, logic is turned on its head, and we are asked to believe that fairness doesn't mean treating everyone equally. It means more for the very rich and more for big oil. But we don't live in a parallel universe. We live in the real world. Fairness means that working families should not be the only people sacrificing And we can't lower the deficit while we give taxpayer dollars away to big oil companies who are making record profits and not producing more energy. It's really amazing to me that anybody can come and make that argument. Now, what makes these subsidies even more ridiculous is that when we pressed those who have supported the industry or those who have come from the industry, everyone seems to admit that oil companies do not need these subsidies. Former President Bush, who was very good with the oil industry, said that oil companies do not need incentives to drill when oil hits $55 per barrel. Those were his remarks. And now it's over $100 a barrel. So if they didn't need incentives to drill when it was at $55 a barrel, God, how does anybody come to the floor and suggest that they need incentives now when it's $100 a barrel? Over 100. And then the former CEO of Shell said that subsidies are not necessary for drilling and production. So that's pretty much probably clear when they're making $137 billion just in that 1 year, and where they will make $1 trillion over the next decade. Of the $24 billion that we save by cutting these subsidies to the Big Five, we can use over $11 billion to extend a series of critically important expiring energy tax incentives. These clean energy technologies will cut demand for oil, it will drive economic growth, it will create jobs, and it will allow America to lead the global clean energy market. Now, despite big oil's rhetoric, let me just tell you, it's amazing. I see they're spending a lot of that money, all this money here, not making oil, but they're spending it on television to scare everybody and to say that, oh, if you take any of their money away, take any of those subsidies away, that somehow prices will rise. Well, we know that despite big oil's rhetoric, cutting subsidies will not raise gas prices. We know that. Why? Because experts from the United States Treasury Department, from the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, and from oil executive testimony that came before the Finance Committee that I sit on, made it very clear that's not the case. But more than that, some of the most important tax policies that will be extended in this bill will help drive down gas prices by creating competition for oil as a transportation fuel. These incentives include one for biofuels, like cellulosic ethanol, biodiesel, also incentives for natural gas and propane used as a transportation fuel. There's also incentives for alternative fuel refueling infrastructure and for electric vehicles. Taken together, these incentives are laying the groundwork for a truly competitive market where we are not beholden to one type of fuel to power our vehicles. But the good news doesn't even end there. There are also tax incentives that will help the United States compete for the renewable industries of the 21st century. For example, the Section 1603 Treasury Grant Program has helped finance renewable energy projects around the country. It has leveraged over $35 billion investments to create tens of thousands of energy projects. In my home state of New Jersey alone, 750 grants were given for solar, geothermal, landfill gas, hydropower, wind projects. These projects are worth over $350 million, creating many jobs, and will help New Jersey on energy bills for decades to come. Another important renewable energy incentive is the production tax credit for wind. Since the last reauthorization of PTC in 2005, wind power capacity has more than tripled. But if that production tax credit is not extended, it's estimated that annual installations of wind will drop by more than 75%, and wind supported jobs will decline from 78,000 in 2012 to 41,000 in 2013, and total wind energy investment will drop by nearly two-thirds. So, Madam President, it's time to get back to reality. Time to tell middle-class families struggling to make ends meet that fairness means everyone pays their fair share when it comes to reducing the deficit. And it means ending ridiculous taxpayer giveaways to the five most profitable companies in the world. I just cannot understand how the oil industry is spending money on radio and other forms of media to say, oh my God, if you take any of our subsidies away, and these aren't even all of the subsidies they have, these are just a couple, the $24 billion over 10 years. They're going to make $1 trillion over 10 years. So you're telling the American people that when you're going to make $1 trillion over 10 years, that we, collectively as taxpayers, must still give you $24 billion? Or else somehow $1 trillion minus $24 billion wouldn't be enough for you in profits, that you would gouge the consumer at the pump? I don't think the American people are going to accept that. It's time for us to stop wasting taxpayer money on oil subsidies and use this money to invest in clean energy, in jobs, in lowering the deficit. All of that can be done on this opportunity when we vote in favor of moving forward on S-2204, the Repeal Big Oil Subsidies Act. It's time to put the interests of the American people ahead of the moneyed interests in this Congress. With this vote and then moving forward, now I hear my colleagues may very well vote for us today to have a debate, which I more than welcome. I'm looking forward to it. I got a lot more to talk about in this regard. But then won't vote at the end to repeal the subsidies. So I guess that what we'll hear is a chorus of voices that will speak about defending big oil and defending its $24 billion in subsidies and justifying that even with $1 trillion in profits, they still need to get their hands into the pockets of taxpayers and take another $24 billion in addition to what they get at the pump so that they can make even more profits. And somehow there will be a justification for that. I hope the American people will be watching, because that type of justification is beyond comprehension. I know it as I hear it from families in New Jersey. I'll also be talking about, I hope we will have this debate, I hope we'll be able to move forward. I want to talk about how, I hear my colleagues talk about drill, baby, drill. Well, I was incredulously amazed that actually we are now exporting from the United States millions of gallons of gasoline and refined petroleum products every day to other places in the world. Seems to me that if we drill it here, particularly in federal lands and water, we should keep it here. Because obviously the bigger the supply that we have, the more we're going to create downward pressure on prices. But I think most Americans would be pretty shocked to know that we're actually exporting. They think everything that's created here is kept here, which is why I found it interesting. I keep hearing my colleagues talk about the Keystone Pipeline. Well, there are those of us who said, you know what? If you'll make it with the materials made in America here, so that we can ensure that American jobs are created with it, and if you keep the energy here, not exported someplace around the world, then there are a lot of people who would say, yeah, along with the right environmental safeguards, yeah, let's consider it. But overwhelmingly, that was voted against. So much for American jobs, so much for securing American energy, because what's the use of a pipeline to bring an energy source and then have it sent to other places in the world? That doesn't help us. So I'm a big believer if you're going to drill it here on federal lands and water, you're going to keep it here, you're going to help us lower prices. I'm a big believer that if we're going to do something like Keystone, well, let's make sure it's made with American materials and made with American hands, and at the end of the day, energy is kept here in the United States. And I'm a big believer of saying, you know, in a time of shared sacrifice, it's wrong to ask working families to do more and yet give the oil companies $24 billion when they'll make $1 trillion in profits. It's wrong to say to a wounded soldier, we're going to cut programs that will ultimately help you get back on your feet in your long-term health care, but we're going to give big oil $24 billion. It's wrong to tell students who are trying to determine their future and get access to that college education and who will encumber significant costs along the way, no, you pay more, but we're going to give big oil $24 billion. It's wrong to tell seniors we're going to end Medicare as we know it, but we're going to give big oil $24 billion. That is beyond my comprehension. So I look forward to the debate because it's going to be very interesting to see some of the remarkable ways in which people are going to have to explain that. I don't think it's explainable to the American people. Tonight's vote starts a process on who's on your side. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the American taxpayer, or are you on the side of big oil? I hope an overwhelming number of our colleagues will, starting tonight and moving towards final passage, say we're on the side of the American taxpayer, the American consumer. And if we do that, we can create some justice in this process. We can help create competition in the energy market to drive down prices. We can reduce the deficit by another $12 billion, and we can be a lot fairer to working families in this country. That's the choice before us. That's a choice I hope the Senate will make in a positive way. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.